Good morning, everybody. I think most of you know me, but if you don't, my name's Charlie. I am one of the ministers here. If you are a visitor today, as Andy has explained, today is a slightly different service. In fact, almost unique in the nearly 20 years I've been here. So come back next week, normal service will be resumed. But we're trying something different today, but it's great to have you with us. As you know, over the last few weeks, we've taken a break from going through the Gospel of Matthew to think about what it means to be a Baptist church. Not a church in competition with other churches, but what's our distinct offering to the Christian community of Sevenoaks? What do Baptists bring to the table? What do we offer? And I know a number of you have very much appreciated this series, because you've emailed me. Thank you. I also know a number of you haven't appreciated this so much, and you've also emailed me. Thank you. Leading a church, we're trying to do something innovative, different, in a diet of preaching and teaching. This leans to the teaching side of things, but it's an attempt to, experiment and try something new. And some things work and some things don't. And I know many of you have appreciated, actually, so I'm over-egging it slightly. But this is us thinking about what it means to be a Baptist church. And if you remember, we started with Simon Jones from Spurgeon's, Vice Principal of Spurgeon's College. You might as well start at the top, eh? And got him in to talk about why he's a Baptist. And the most important thing for Simon is the multi-voiced approach to worship. It's the fact that Baptist churches have always sought one another's opinions into how to be church. We are congregational in our government. If you remember, he talked about those very early church meetings, about going on for 3 or 4 hours and often slightly anarchic with people yelling over one another. We won't be doing that today. There is no way I'm going to let that happen. But today is a response to Simon's sermon very much. And so was the survey. Okay, it's a very British, reserved way of doing it, but it's a way to seek your opinion and get a multi-voiced into how we do church well together, how we serve, how we are faithful as a church community. The next week, Andy reminded us of the centrality of baptism and communion in our church life together. Baptism being the start of the journey of the Christian faith, and communion being the meal that sustains it week in and week out and draws us back to Jesus and the cross. I then talked about the congregation, membership, and the church, about how we organize ourselves as Baptists, and I encourage us to think about ourselves as owners rather than consumers. As members of a Baptist church, we are a family. Andy and I have specific roles of leadership, but we are equal amongst you. And actually, all of us are owners of this thing called Bessels Green Baptist Church, and we seek to serve God and follow him together. We don't just come as audience members on a Sunday to be entertained. Andy then talked to us about stewardship and leadership. I like this quote: stewardship is about how we spend our life. That's our time, our talents, our treasure, and how we invest our lives in God's work in the world. And he encouraged us to think about that in a balanced, holistic way. To think about how our work, our marriage, our family, our community, our church, and ourselves, and actually we need to be engaged in serving God in all of those areas. So we're not saying you have to ignore all the others and just invest all your life into church. No, God has called you to be a part of a family and in community. So how do we balance those? But how is church a part of that, an important part of that, serving God and seeking his kingdom? Josh talked about children in the church and what does it mean to center their voices and their opinions, and to think about the next generation coming up after us and how we impart our faith to children. Finally, I reflected on the fact that Baptist churches have always been diverse. It's part of being congregational, if you think about it. It's a logical outworking. We're diverse in opinions, in ideas, and there's a great strength in that. But there's also great potential for division in that. So it's important that we focus on what unites us, on our unity. And actually this table and Jesus and his body and his blood broken and shared is what unites us. as we gather around this table, as we share one loaf of bread together. We are one family. Yes, we can have different opinions, but ultimately, if I disagree with you, it doesn't mean I have to hate you. I can love you and still disagree. And we need to learn that in our generation because it's becoming increasingly harder. Which is why I like that Colossians reading and why I did it again today. Bear with one another. And if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, you must also forgive. And above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you are called in one body. And be thankful. That's an important basis, isn't it? That's an important starting point for our conversation. And then last week, Joth from Seba wrapped things up thinking about what does mission and evangelism look like. Baptists have always been an outward-looking people. We don't exist for ourselves. We exist for the community out there that aren't yet part of God's kingdom. How do we do that well? So there you are. That is what we've been doing. That's where we've been going. That's what we've been thinking about what it means to be a Baptist church. And as part of it, we've surveyed you. So I put some questions together. I put a lot of thought and time into it and invited you to complete a survey about what are we doing well? What could we do better? And by that I mean, how are we being faithful? And how could we be more faithful? That's really the important question. And thank you, because, we're going to come on and look, and I'm going to share some of the results of that, and then we're going to talk about it. I'll just be talking for another 5 or 10 minutes more. But before we do, an author I really like is Brené Brown, in her leadership book, Braving the Wilderness in particular. It's not a Christian book, but Brené herself is a Christian. And I think you can read that all the way through her style and her leadership technique. And she talks about when we have these kinds of conversations, having what she calls a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. Basically, we often come into these conversations with a kind of a weak back, but a very armored and defensive front. You know, we wear the armor on the front. And actually, in these conversations, she encourages us to think about what it means to have actually a strong back, principles, but a soft, open, vulnerable front that is kind to other people and listens. I need to be honest with you this morning. If this is my comfort zone, I am way over here today. And I could be all alpha-y about it, and I can do that. I can crank up the leadership handle. I've done enough training on that. I know how to do that. And I can kind of stretch myself big and bellow and lead. But the truth is, asking you what you think of Bethel's Green Baptist Church is one of the most acutely vulnerable things I've done in a very long time. But it's important that we do that because we are a family. And we need to know where we can improve and what areas we can be more faithful in. And I know I'm not Jesus. I know I have blind spots. I know I have weaknesses. So we need other people to come in and fill those gaps and address those weaknesses. Because I'm afraid if you're looking for Jesus, you failed in Andy and I. Because we can't do it all, so we do it as a community. So this morning, as we talk with one another, have principles. Absolutely, have a strong back. But let's be open to one another and kind. And the other thing I wanted to say is often in these kind of conversations, there's a lot of shoulds and oughts that get thrown around. A kind of puritanical religion can lean a lot towards guilt. All these things we should be doing, we ought to be doing because other churches are doing them. And I've had a lot of therapy over the years. And one of the things my therapist used to say to me is you need to stop shoulding on yourself. Because if you hear a lot of should and ought kicked around, often there's some guilt behind there somewhere. We should be doing this, we ought to be doing that. Oh, actually, in the middle of that, there are things we could do, things we can do. But I tell you what I'm much more interested in is a life lived out of gratitude to God for all he's done, a life of gratitude lived out to what Jesus has done. And they're the things that I want to do and I'm inspired to do by gratitude. So as we talk today, I'd love us to lean to this end. In gratitude for all that Jesus has done for us, for this community, for his goodness and love in our lives, how are we going to respond to that, hopefully and positively? Not, this is what we should do and we ought to do, and we're going to berate ourselves and feel guilty. No, how are we going to respond in gratitude and in love? Ultimately, I'm talking about grace. How do we live with grace? So let me quickly go through this, and I'm going to take 5 minutes, and I'm going to go very fast. I will produce a full report with all the demographic information and everything for you all to read. But 79 people completed the survey for us, 60 members, about 40% of our congregation, or 40% of our membership. And there was a broad, diverse range of opinions. Quite a lot of things appeared just once. Someone said it, and then there wasn't any correlation between those. They are important. We will capture those ideas, and the trustees and elders will look at them. But today I'm going to look at the themes rather than the individual comments. Just to let you know a little bit about how I did this, I actually used a large language model, an AI tool, to analyze the data that was in that. It's actually a very useful thing to do because it looks for patterns. It's basically a large pattern recognition tool that uses human language. So it looks for recurring patterns. And it's incredibly good at it. And it's fast. So I'm very grateful that that's been invented in the last couple of years because it made my job a lot easier. But more importantly, it made it neutral. So it doesn't have a bias. I didn't tell it, give me all the happy, positive responses. I just said, what did people say? Give it to me as it is. If I'd have done the analysis, I'd have been biased. And knowing my personality, I'd have just labored on the negative. But instead, this is completely neutral. This is what you said, people. And this is how you described Bessel's Green Baptist Church. Sorry, Paul, I'm going to move around. Bessel's Green Baptist Church is described as a warm, biblically grounded and community-focused church, known for its welcoming atmosphere and Christ-centered teaching. It balances a conservative theological foundation, particularly on Scripture and Jesus, with inclusivity, embracing diverse viewpoints while maintaining unity. BGBC leans evangelical but takes a broader approach to biblical interpretation. Growth opportunities include increasing diversity in leadership, youth engagement, and congregational involvement, with concerns about burnout amongst key leaders and volunteers. Does that sound fair? That's not what Andy and I, that's what you said. That was the aggregation of all of your opinions of Bessel's Green Baptist. That's how you describe us. I thought it was quite interesting. I won't go through all the quotes. These are quotes that evidence and back up. I won't do that. We haven't got time. There's a word cloud. Remember I asked you what 3 words would you use to describe Bessel's Green? This is what you said. The bigger the word, the more often it appeared. So strengths. Nearly 40% of you said our biggest strength was being welcoming and inclusive. A significant number of respondents highlighted the welcoming, inclusive nature of the church, described as a warm, friendly place where people feel embraced and accepted. That was 40% of you felt that was our biggest strength. Quotes again. I won't read all of these. BGC is a place where everyone is greeted with open arms. It's a truly welcoming community. Our second strength is about being a community and supportive. The strong sense of community and the supportive environment were repeatedly mentioned, 30%. Feels like BGBC feels like my second home. Everyone genuinely cares about you here. I hope we all share that sentiment. That was from one person. Our third strength, 21% said it's biblically focused and Jesus-centered. The emphasis on biblical teaching and Jesus-centered worship was frequently noted as a key strength. So yeah, that's 3 things that you felt we did well as a church. Our weaknesses. About 25% of you would like more diverse voices. And it's not quite captured, but that was in age and in gender at the front. More young voices, more female voices. Mentioned the need, for, especially from the leadership and from the front. This was seen as an area where the church could improve inclusivity. It'd be nice to see more young people, especially in leadership or worship roles. Evangelism is seen as a weakness. and outreach. 20% of you. In some ways, that's not surprising because I don't think that's my gift. So actually, this is an area where I need other people to help and participate and lead, dare I say. Respondents highlighted the need for stronger and more focused outreach and evangelism, 20% of you. Congregational engagement. Now this is tricky because there's a contradiction here, you'll see with a comment later. 15% of you, a recurring theme was the perceived need for more active participation and engagement from the congregation. Some felt the members could take on more responsibility for church activities and ministries. About 15% thought that. Hold that, because that contradicts something later, so we've got a tension here. Opportunities. The number one opportunity, nearly 30% would like to see more young people involved. Our age demographic leans towards 50s, 60s, 70s, if I'm honest. When we looked at the survey, I'll give you the demographic data later. But we have a big gap in our 20s. 18 to 30 are almost absent, with a few exceptions. The potential increased engagement with youth and young people was a common theme. Respondents saw a growing need for programs that attract and retain younger generations in the church. That's an opportunity for us. Community outreach, that ties in with the evangelism, I think, 22.5%. Projects like the Wellbeing Initiative and local events were seen as an opportunity. So again, to think about how we look out. Finally, the use of technology and online services. I think people felt our online service was a really good offering, but from reading the responses, I think they felt we could find other ways to reach out. I think we do this reasonably well, actually, but this is what you said. Finally, threats. Now, this is where 30%, remember 15% said you should be more involved as a congregation? 30% of you expressed a real threat being time and overcommitment. A large number of respondents expressed the concern that members of the church are already overstretched, both in their personal lives and with church commitments. This could lead to burnout and limit the church's ability to engage. Remember that question that said, could you get more involved? Or, I think just involved just about the right amount. Almost everybody said, I think my commitment is just about right at the moment. It was almost universal. You saw a threat losing key ministers and leaders. The potential loss of key leadership figures was seen as a major threat. Respondents worried about the impact of any leadership transition. As I said, I didn't write this. This is what you said. So 25% of you raised that. We have amazing leaders, but if they were to leave, I'm not sure how the church would cope. Their presence is such a big part of what makes BGBC special. Threats. Financial stability. Concerns particularly about the Wellbeing Project, and after the seed funding is used up, how that would, and whether we stretch ourselves financially. We take on too many financial commitments. 18% of you. So there you are. That is what you said about Bessells Green Baptist Church. The top suggestions were to strengthen youth engagement, expand our community outreach, increase diversity in leadership, and improve congregational engagement. What I'd like us to do now is I'd like to invite you to turn to the people around you, groups of 4 or more, and what I'd like to hear from you is what's the one top thing that struck you from that feedback? The idea is that the good, there's lots of good suggestions in there, but the good is the enemy of the best. I want to know what's the one. What's the one that you think actually, and remember, inspires you? It might be a challenge, but it's a challenge you feel up for. And you think we should turn and address as a church out of gratitude. What's the one that you think bubbles to the top for you? I'd love you to turn into groups of, as I said, 4 or more. I'd love you to pray together. You're going to have to find a leader amongst you, someone who's willing to steer things. Pray and talk together about what I've just presented to you. And then at about 5 past, in 10 minutes' time, I'll come and get some little bits of feedback from you about what you think. And this will set a direction. Our elders, our trustees, Andy and I are here. We want to hear you, and this will set a direction for the next season of our life. What are we going to, what have you, and we expect, and by the way, as we talk together, we anticipate we will hear God's voice through one another. So as we pray and as we talk, we are seeking the voice of God in our midst through conversation.